Coming up in our newscast tonight. Following the historic visit by Seoul's special envoys to North Korea, the two sides keep the momentum going by agreeing to hold a summit in late April. Meeting with leaders of the nation's 5 major political parties, President Moon reiterates his administration won't settle for anything less than the denuclearization of the peninsula. As we inch closer to the start of the 2018 Winter Paralympics, North Korea's delegation arrives in the south, while torchbearers continue the relay to bring the symbolic flame to PyeongChang. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, time for Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program live from Seoul. I'm Daniel Choi. The first inter-Korean summit in more than a decade is set. Pyongyang expressed willingness to talk to Washington. However, President Moon Jae-in made it clear regardless of these developments, his end goal remains unchanged, scrapping all nuclear weapons on the peninsula. Moon Jae-in has our top story.
Guarded optimism appears to be the stand South Korean President Moon Jae-in is taking regarding the latest leap forward in relations between the two Koreas. According to President Moon's press secretary, the South Korean leader made clear on Wednesday that his end goal remains unchanged, North Korea's denuclearization, and that sanctions on Pyongyang will not be eased for the sake of the summit with the North Kim Jong-un. President Moon's remarks follow his envoy's press briefing on the outcome of their 2-day visit to North Korea.
South and North Korea have agreed to hold the third Leaders Summit at Peace House in Panmunjom in late April. For this, we agreed to hold working-level talks.
The Peace House is a building that sits on the South Korean side of the so-called Truce Village that straddles the border, and if the summit is held here, it would mark the first time a North Korean leader has stepped on South Korean soil since the end of the Korean War in the early 1950s. In another remarkable development, South Korea said North Korea is willing to talk to the U.S. about giving up its nuclear weapons and has agreed to refrain from conducting nuclear and missile tests while engaging in dialogue. Plus, for the first time ever, the two sides will open a communication hotline so that Moon and Kim can directly speak to one another before the get-together.
North Korea clearly stated its willingness to denuclearize. It also clarified that it had no reason to retain nuclear weapons if the military threat to North Korea is resolved and regime security is guaranteed.
It's a positive statement that caught many by surprise, but when parsed, comes with significant caveats. Pyongyang's reference to elimination of military threat against the regime could run counter to U.S. priorities, which has 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea.
Along with Seo-hoon, director of the National Intelligence Service, and others, I will soon be visiting the U.S. to explain the outcome of our North Korea visit. We also plan to visit China and Russia following the U.S. trip.
The presidential envoys leave for Washington Thursday morning. Despite the caveats, the agreements represent a significant diplomatic accomplishment for South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who used the Winter Olympic Games to engineer a thaw in relations with the North, which had previously been seen as a distant prospect. Moon Jae-in, Arirang News, the Blue House.
U.S. President Donald Trump had somewhat of a positive response to the set inter-Korean summit while taking credit for the historic developments. However, according to our Kwon Jang-ho, Washington remains cautious of Pyongyang's overture, pledging to continue the pressure campaign for the time being.
We'll see what happens. That's the U.S. president's reaction on hearing that North Korea is open to talks with the United States. Later, he also tweeted, for the first time in many years, a serious effort is being made by all parties concerned. Maybe false hope, but the U.S. is ready to go hard in either direction. It's a sentiment he repeated later, but he was also quick to credit his administration and himself for bringing about the current situation.
I think that they are sincere, but I think they're sincere also because the sanctions and what we're doing with respect to North Korea, including, the great help that we've been given from China.
Trump declined to comment on whether he had any preconditions for talks, simply calling it a very tenuous situation. Vice President Mike Pence, meanwhile, stressed that although they will see which way talks go, In the meantime, the campaign of sanctions and pressure will continue until they see, quote, credible, verifiable and concrete steps towards denuclearization. US intelligence officials also reiterated this stance while expressing doubt over whether the current situation could be considered a significant breakthrough.
Hope springs eternal, but we need to learn a lot more relative to these talks. North Korea has to agree to not possess nuclear capability. And until that happens, we cannot have an agreement with them, and that is our position.
South Korea's presidential envoys who met with Kim Jong-un will travel to the US on Thursday to directly brief Washington on the outcome of their visit and further explore the possibility for US-North Korea talks. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
The EU and China welcomed the idea of inter-Korean summit, while Japan remained rather reserved. Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson Kang Kyung said Tuesday that relevant parties should seize the current opportunity to solve the nuclear issue on the peninsula. Federica Mogherini, the EU's foreign policy chief, vowed to work on ways to support the steps needed for the process and host Seoul's top diplomat Conn-young later this month to discuss the issue. In contrast, Japan's chief cabinet secretary Yoshihide Suga expressed skepticism over the development, pointing out past discussions with the regime did not result in denuclearization. He emphasized that talks for the sake of talks are meaningless. From continued nuke tests and rhetorics to a historic summit set for April, the significant change is welcome but sudden. Hwang Ho-jun zooms in on what might have triggered the turnaround and help us gauge if Pyongyang's intention to denuclearize is genuine.
A little over a week after the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, in which North Korea also participated, came Tuesday's agreement in which Pyongyang said it is willing to return to the negotiation table, even willing to discuss the issue of denuclearization. According to the Blue House, the North claimed it would no longer need its nuclear program should military threats against it be removed and its safety guaranteed. So what's caused this apparent change of heart? It could be the constant efforts by President Moon Jae-in's new liberal administration in South Korea to resume dialogue with Pyongyang, but experts say the North could very well be acting out of desperation.
North Korea would be worried, even fearful of the so-called maximum pressure and sanctions out of the U.S. and talk of possible military options. Plus, those stifling sanctions are leading to complaints among North Korea's wealthy elite. So Kim Jong-un would be feeling pressure to do something about that.
If so, that might be a credit to President Trump's aggressive posture. Last October, he met with defense officials at the White House to look at his military options, even tweeting that in dealing with North Korea, only one thing will work. But in fact, Pyongyang has long said it's developing nuclear weapons precisely because of what it calls America's hostile policy and nuclear threat, and it has refused to put its nuclear weapons up for negotiation. So while Tuesday's agreement is significant, some experts doubt whether North Korea will really give up its arsenal. For one thing, the agreement between Seoul and Pyongyang is still conditional, not to mention Pyongyang's conduct in the past.
We've been down this road before. We've had the summits. We've had countless negotiations. We've had two previous agreements, both of which have all failed. And so history teaches us that dialogue and negotiations and agreements don't necessarily lead to a change from the status quo or change in the trajectory of foreign relations with North Korea.
In just a month's time, the third summit between the heads of state of South and North Korea will take place, and it will be the very first time a North Korean leader has set foot in the South. But experts caution against celebrating that as a victory in itself, since there's still a long road ahead until Washington and Pyongyang re-engage in dialogue and until the peninsula is truly free of nuclear weapons. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Curiosity peaks as to what we can expect from the first inter-Korean summit in more than a decade. Kim Ho-gyun helps paint a clearer picture of how it could unfold by reflecting on previous such sessions.
The first inter-Korean summit took place in the year 2000. Then South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il met in Pyongyang to hold talks based on peaceful coexistence. As a result of the talks, the two leaders signed the June 15th Joint Declaration, which led to increased economic cooperation between the two Koreas and to reunions of separated families twice that same year. The talks also led to Kim Dae-jung being awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. The second summit came 7 years later between the next South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun and Kim Jong-il. Those talks centered mainly on peace and prosperity, including topics on building military trust and solving the North Korean nuclear issue. The 3-day summit, also held in Pyongyang, led to the two leaders vowing to end the armistice agreement signed in 1953 and forge a permanent peace treaty between the two Koreas. And now, 11 years later, after the positive outcome of President Moon Jae-in's special envoy's visit to the north, the two Koreas have decided to hold their third historic summit by the end of April. The talks would likely center on the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, the reopening of the Kaesong industrial complex, and even on the possibility of North Korea holding talks with the United States. The two sides first spoke of a summit after the North Korean delegation invited President Moon to Pyongyang during the Winter Olympics, possibly hinting at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's increased willingness for talks. Kim Mo-kyan, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in met with the leaders of Korea's 5 major parties, with cross-border relations topping the agenda. The Liberal leader emphasized the ultimate goal is still denuclearization. Kim Min-ji shares with us his remarks.
The ultimate goal of the South Korean government is North Korea's denuclearization. That's according to President Moon Jae-in during a luncheon Wednesday with the leaders of the country's 5 major political parties. He said that his government won't settle for anything less. The meeting came a day after the South Korean delegation returned from their visit to North Korea, with President Moon updating the party leaders on the latest developments.
한반도 평화와 비핵화에 있어서 아주 중요한 그런 고비를 맞이한 것 같습니다. 그러나 이제 시작이기 때문에 아직까지는 낙관할 수 없는 그런 상황이라고 봅니다.
The ruling party applauded the government for achieving the agreement to hold inter-Korean-summit talks and welcomed the president's follow-up plans.
The president clearly laid out the route to denuclearization through a sophisticated roadmap that will lead to complete nuclear disarmament. Regarding conditions for the inter-Korean talks, he said it requires cooperation from the two Koreas and the U.S., as well as support from the international community. Based on this, he said, the conditions were created and the outcome was inter-Korean dialogue.
Conservative and centrist parties, meanwhile, made clear their views on the North Korea issue, stressing that the summit talks must not result in the easing of sanctions imposed on Pyongyang.
Although sanctions were eased to a certain extent for individuals during the Winter Olympics, from now on it's a different story. The president said sanctions can be eased in coordination with the international community, but at this moment he has no intention to do that and sees it as impossible. He also said that there will be no favors done just because the two sides have started talks.
The president also apparently brushed off speculation about his envoys making any secret agreements with North Korea during their visit. The main opposition party raised concerns that Seoul is being fooled by Pyongyang. The party also questioned why the summit talks were scheduled for April, to which the Blue House said that it was Moon's campaign pledge to hold talks within a year of taking office.
I get the feeling that the government is going along with the demands of North Korea, not just when it comes to the summit talks, but all other inter-Korean events as well. In regards to the timing, it seems as though the government wants to foster a peaceful mood ahead of the June local elections, to make the vote more favorable to them. I also warn that North Korea cannot be allowed to use the summit talks to buy more time to complete its nuclear programs.
The country's liberal parties, however, welcome the latest developments. The Party for Democracy and Peace called it a golden opportunity that should be used well so that inter-Korean talks lead to dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington. The Justice Party said the current situation shows that Seoul is in the driver's seat in terms of security affairs on the peninsula, adding that all parties should cooperate to maintain the peace momentum. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Kim Jong-un appears to have shifted his tone regarding the upcoming combined military exercise. According to the envoys visiting from Seoul, he expressed understanding about the drills and said the regime will not carry out any provocative acts during the upcoming talks. Oh Jung-hee helps us read between the lines.
Is North Korea sincere about continuing the rare momentum for dialogue and finally sitting down with the U.S.? North Korean leader Kim Jong-un told South Korea's envoys that he, quote, understands the Seoul-Washington joint military drills due to take place in April on a scale similar to previous years. As recently as last weekend, though, and many other times, North Korea has called the exercises a rehearsal for an invasion. Experts think such a drastic and sudden shift in stance has occurred because Pyongyang does not wish to put the brakes on the recent improvements in inter-Korean relations.
South Korea can't focus solely on North Korea. It has to consider its relations with the U.S., and the North knows it. So Kim Jong-un decided to make room for Seoul to maintain good relations with Washington by giving his okay to the drills in April.
According to the envoys who went to Pyongyang, the North Korean leader also promised that his regime won't conduct nuclear or missile tests while talks continue. And with the U.S. calling for the North to show a sincere attitude towards denuclearization, a halt to those provocations is seen as helping build a foundation for talks between Pyongyang and Washington.
This shows that North Korea is paying a great deal of attention to this momentum and the possibility that better inter-Korean relations could lead to talks with Washington. Pyongyang is aware that it needs to concede something to get any kind of benefit.
Still, there's a lot that remains to be seen concerning what exactly North Korea means by denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and whether it's really willing to abandon its nuclear weapons.
When North Korea talks about denuclearization, that often refers to the whole peninsula. Even if South Korea doesn't have tactical nuclear weapons, the North considers America's extended deterrence to be, in effect, nuclear weapons on the peninsula. So the North's reference to denuclearization means an end to or a decrease in US extended deterrence.
Kim Jong-un said he wants two conditions: no military threats and a promise of the regime's security. And these are what Pyongyang's been stipulating for decades. Kim's remarks that Pyongyang still has an end goal of denuclearization doesn't mean that the regime has some new notion of what that means.
But for now at least, Kim Jong-un appears to be a bit more flexible on some of the things that Pyongyang was most sensitive about: Seoul-Washington joint military drills and North Korea's nuclear missile programs. With South Korea's envoy set to leave for the United States on Thursday, carrying a message from Kim Jong-un, the ball is now back in Washington's court. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Pyongyang invited Seoul's Taekwondo demonstration and performing arts team to North Korea to put on a show there, visible signs of willingness to keep the current reconciliatory momentum going. Park Jo-won sheds light on this development as well as other possible inter-Korean cultural exchanges.
The proposed arts performances would be the first time that any South Korean arts company has given a performance in North Korea's capital Pyongyang since 2002, when South Korea's KBS Symphony Orchestra performed together with the North State Symphony Orchestra. They played a variety of pieces including Arirang, Korea's traditional folk song that has been sung on the peninsula well before it was divided in the mid-20th century. A few days later, a South Korean rock band and singers took to the stage together with North Korean singers. Since then, other cultural performances occasionally continued at the Mount Kumgang Resort until all cultural exchanges stopped in 2008. But last month, North Korea's arts companies resumed inter-Korean cultural exchanges with performances in the South to mark the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. No specific dates of a possible performance in Pyongyang by a group from the South have yet been revealed, but it is expected that the performances will likely be held after summit talks between the leaders of the two Koreas. The performances are expected to include a range of genres, such as traditional music, classical music, and even K-pop performances. Considering that North Korea's ceremonial head of state Kim Young-nam reportedly said to the Korean National Ballet's artistic director Kang Soo-jin last month during his visit to Seoul that it'd be nice if the ballet company could perform in North Korea, a ballet performance could also be included. Experts say, however, that while cultural exchanges are helpful for creating a positive mood around inter-Korean relations, they won't have any significant impact on solving real political issues on the peninsula.
It creates a spirit of good feeling, and it helps to keep the momentum of inter-Korean negotiations moving, but I don't think it actually is substantial. My concern is that they don't actually really narrow the strategic divide between the two Koreas. So they're more like window dressing. You know, they create some atmosphere, they create some positive momentum, but they don't really get to the major issues between the two Koreas.
South Korea's Cultural Ministry officials told local media Wednesday that they have started to discuss specifics about the performances with the Unification Ministry. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Trump's chief economic advisor Gary Cohn resigns, a development that fans fears of a looming trade war. According to White House officials, there was no single factor behind the decision, but the move comes after an intense debate within the administration about the tariff proposals on steel and aluminum imports. The former Goldman Sachs executive opposed tariffs and warned he would quit if Trump follows through with that plan. The Paralympics flame has arrived in Gangwon-do province. The relay is on with a global sporting event officially marking its start this Friday. Won Jung-hwan takes us to the action.
The 2018 PyeongChang Paralympics torch relay is on the road, carrying the true meaning of let everyone shine. The relay aims to be a symbol of unity and companionship that overcomes the barrier between disabled and non-disabled. 800 torchbearers will carry the torch during its 80-kilometer, 8-day journey, the number 8 symbolizing mankind's infinite potential.
You cannot ride a unicycle without putting constant effort into it, and you have to fall and stand several times to go forward. Paralympic athletes have probably been doing the same, as they will have had to give constant effort to reach this place.
Last week, 8 Paralympic torches that traveled from different areas such as Jeju, Anyang, Nonsan, and even one from the UK have been united into one in Seoul. The Paralympic flame lighting ceremony, which took place alongside the traditional Cheongol Daeborong full moon bonfire lighting, marked the beginning of the torch relay. After traveling around Seoul over the weekend, the flame reached Cheongsan in Gangwon-do province on Wednesday, the venue for the alpine skiing events during the Paralympic Games. The torch will travel through major cities in Gangwon-do province, including Gangneung and PyeongChang, delivering the true value and emotion of the Paralympics and showing that we don't live alone in the world, but live together, shoulder to shoulder.
The PyeongChang Paralympics is all about working together with disabled and able-bodied friends. So I think it is meaningful to walk together in this torch relay. My friend here is deaf, so this event is especially meaningful for us.
Unlike the Olympic torch relay, the Paralympic torch is carried by teams of 2 torchbearers, symbolizing companionship and the need to support each other in pursuit of our dreams. When the Paralympic torch reaches PyeongChang Olympic Stadium on Friday, it will officially announce the start of the Winter Paralympics, where nearly 600 athletes from 49 countries will compete in 6 sports for 80 gold medals. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News, Cheongsan.
North Korea's 24-member Paralympics delegation arrived today using the Western Land Route, but Pyongyang did not send an art troupe and a touring squad this time around. Kim Young-gil has the full story.
North Korea's Paralympics delegation, made up of 4 officials from its Paralympics committee and 20 other people, including 2 athletes that are taking part in the Games, entered South Korea on Wednesday.
North Korea's Paralympics delegation crossed the military demarcation line at 8:45 a.m. and arrived at South Korea's Customs, Immigration and Quarantine Office at 8:50 a.m.
Pool reporters from South Korea's Unification Ministry asked the delegation about their feelings towards their visit to the South, but the delegation barely gave a response. Hwang Chung-sung, a senior official at North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the country, did respond, saying that he was pleased. Hwang was the North representative at the working-level talks with South Korea last month to negotiate the North participation in the PyeongChang Winter Paralympic Games. Two North Korean sit skiers, Kim Jong-hyun and Mayu Chul, will compete in cross-country skiing on March 11th and 14th. The International Paralympic Committee invited North Korea to the PyeongChang Winter Paralympics and offered 2 slots to athletes to compete in para-Nordic skiing events. 4 other athletes will just watch the Paralympic matches. It is the first time ever for North Korea to participate in the Winter Paralympics. The North delegation will return home around March 15th. Kim Young-in, Arirang News.
Now for the weather updates, we turn to our Michelle Bach at the Weather Center. Michelle?
Daniel, now the rain already started in some southern regions and more clouds are currently moving in and expected to move northwards along with some thunder and lightning overnight. And heavy downpour is also expected along the coast of Gyeongsang-namdo province, and the rest of the nation will also be drenched in rain, although the amount of precipitation will be less. Now, meanwhile, Gangwon province, where the PyeongChang Paralympics will take place, will receive some snow. Now, Seoul begins tomorrow morning at 2 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Busan hits 3 and 7 degrees respectively. And during the day, Seoul is expected to reach up to 7 degrees, Gwangju 4 and Busan 8 degrees. Cold mornings will linger throughout the weekend, but starting next week, spring conditions will definitely dominate the forecast. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all for tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for staying with us.